What would you do if you had spent 2 silent years living in the same house as the most dangerous man alive, invisible to him as furniture, and then one ordinary Tuesday you told him you would be finishing late because you had a date, and watched the entire room go cold as the man who feared nothing on earth slowly set down his glass? She had said it without thinking. 4 words, offered the way you offer a schedule change, and the temperature in that kitchen dropped 20 degrees. He did not shout. He did not move for a long moment at all. And in the silence that followed, a woman who had spent her whole life being looked past finally understood that she had been seen every single day by the one man she had never dared imagine was looking. This is a story of hidden worth, quiet devotion, and the ruthless man who discovered exactly what he felt only when he was about to lose it. Nessa Kelleher had made a life out of not being noticed, and she had gotten so good at it that she sometimes frightened herself. She was 29, soft and generously curved, with a round, warm face, and a habit of stepping aside in corridors before anyone had asked her to, and for 2 years she had been the head housekeeper of a fortress above the water that belonged to a man the whole city spoke of in lowered voices. She had learned to move through those rooms like weather present and unremarked. She knew which floorboards spoke. She knew to be gone from a hallway 30 seconds before the men in dark suits came down it. She had trained herself thoroughly and painfully to take up as little space as a body like hers could manage, because she had grown up in a house where her mother measured love in dress sizes and had spent her 20s being told, in 100 polite ways, that a woman her shape should be grateful for whatever attention she got. What nobody in that fortress understood was what she actually was, because Nessa Kelleher had a memory that did not let go of anything. It was not a trick or a gift she had cultivated. It was simply how she was made. She could tell you what a room had looked like 11 months ago, and what had since been moved 2 inches to the left. She knew the sound of every car that came up that drive, the difference between the men who belonged and the men who were pretending. She had catalogued, without ever meaning to, every face that had crossed that threshold in 2 years, every delivery, every hour, every small wrongness. People spoke freely around her the way they speak freely around a lamp, and Nessa remembered all of it and said nothing, because saying something was how women like her lost their positions. And on the ordinary Tuesday when everything changed, she was polishing glassware in the kitchen at 4 in the afternoon, when her employer walked in, and she told him, without looking up, that she would be finishing an hour late because she had a date. Dashiell Cole was the reason. Rooms had temperatures. He was tall and broad and dressed in a charcoal suit cut with lethal precision, the head of a syndicate that owned the ports and the freight lines, and the fear of every powerful family for 100 miles, and he was rumored to end a life with a single unhurried nod. He rarely raised his voice. He had never once, in 2 years, raised it to Nessa, but he had also, so far as she could tell, barely spoken to her at all, and she had built her entire understanding of her place in that house on the belief that she was invisible to him, and she had been catastrophically wrong. Because Dashiell Cole had noticed Nessa Kelleher on her 3rd day and had been quietly, helplessly noticing her ever since, he noticed she hummed under her breath when she thought she was alone. He noticed she left the study window cracked exactly 2 inches because he slept better with the sound of the water, something he had never told a living soul, and she had simply worked out. He noticed the tea appeared at his elbow at 11 every night without being asked, and that on the anniversary of his father's death, a day nobody in his organization acknowledged. There was always a single lit candle in the front hall that no one would admit to placing. He had spent 2 years in a house full of people who wanted things from him and one woman who wanted nothing, who took care of him with a quiet, unclaimed thoroughness, and who apologized to doorframes. He had not said a word about any of it, because Dashiell Cole was a man who had learned very young that the things he loved got used against him, and so he had made a discipline of wanting nothing visibly, and he had told himself for 2 years that the warmth he felt when she came into a room was gratitude for competent staff. And then, on an ordinary Tuesday, the woman he had built his whole quiet life around said she had a date. He stopped in the kitchen doorway. He set his glass down on the counter with a small, precise click, and for a moment he simply stood there while the temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. "A date?" he said. Nessa looked up and immediately regretted looking up, because she had never in 2 years seen that expression on his face. "With whom?" he said. She flushed to her collarbones. "It's just a man from my building," she said. "Please don't. I'll finish everything before I go. I'll come in early tomorrow." "I'm not asking about the schedule," Dashiell said. There was a silence so complete she could hear the water outside. Then he turned and walked out without another word, and Nessa stood in that kitchen with a glass in her hand and her heart hammering, and understood absolutely nothing about what had just happened. She had no idea she had just detonated 2 years of a very dangerous man's carefully maintained composure. The date was a disaster, which Nessa later decided was the only mercy in the whole affair. The man from her building spent an hour explaining his own opinions to her, and then over dessert told her she had a lovely face, and that if she lost a little weight, she could really do quite well for herself. Nessa had heard that sentence, or its cousin, so many times in her life that she did not even flinch. She thanked him for dinner. She went home, and at 11:10, she came through the fortress doors, still in the good dress she had almost not worn, and found every light on the ground floor burning and Dashiell Cole sitting in the front hall in an armchair that did not belong in the front hall, with a glass of amber whiskey he had not touched. He rose when she came in. That was the first strange thing. In 2 years he had never once risen when she entered a room, because employers do not rise for housekeepers, and Nessa stopped in the doorway with her keys in her hand. "You're back early," he said. "It didn't go well," she said. And then, because it was late, and she was tired, and something in his face had cracked, she added, "Honestly, he told me I'd do quite well for myself if I lost some weight." And Nessa Kelleher watched the most feared man on the coast go absolutely, terrifyingly still. "His name," Dashiell said. "Absolutely not," said Nessa. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he set the untouched whiskey down and crossed the hall, and he stopped a respectful distance away. And he said the thing that undid 2 years of her carefully arranged invisibility. "Do you know that you leave my study window open 2 inches?" he said. Nessa blinked. "Do you know that there has been a candle in this hall every 4th of November for 2 years, and that not one person in this organization has ever mentioned it? Do you know that I have not had to ask for tea at 11 o'clock since the spring of your first year?" His voice was very quiet. "I have been noticing you for 2 years, Miss Kelleher. I told myself it was because you are excellent at your work." He let out a breath. "And then you said you had a date, and I sat in this hall for 4 hours like a fool, and I understood that I have been lying to myself for a very long time." Nessa could not speak. Nobody had ever noticed her noticing. He did not touch her. He did not close the distance. He simply looked at her, and then said quietly, "I have no right to any of this. You work for me. If you tell me to never mention it again, I will never mention it again, and nothing in your position changes, and that is a promise." Then he went upstairs. And Nessa Kelleher stood alone in that hall for a very long time, in her good dress, with her heart going like a bird. Neither of them knew that a man in that house had watched the whole exchange from the shadow of the upper landing, and had understood exactly what it meant, and exactly how to use it. Everything changed after that night, though not in the way Nessa had braced for. Dashiell did not press. He kept the promise so exactly that it nearly drove her mad. What he did instead was stop hiding. He began finding reasons to be in rooms she was working in. He began asking her opinion, first about small things, and then, startlingly, about large ones. And when she gave it, he listened the way no one had ever listened to her in her life. And within a month, he did something that reordered the entire household. He removed her from the housekeeping staff and made her the estate manager, with authority over the whole property and every person on it. And when his own men bristled, he said, in front of all of them, that Nessa Kelleher had a memory better than his security logs, and that anyone who had a problem with her should feel free to explain it to him personally. Nobody had a problem with her after that, and Nessa, who had spent 29 years making herself smaller, began to unfold. She stopped stepping aside in corridors. She started ordering the house the way she had silently known it should be ordered for 2 years. Every night they sat in the study over a decanter of amber whiskey he poured for himself, and tea he poured for her, and he told her things he had never told another living soul about the father he had buried and the trust he had learned to bury with him. He learned she flinched at raised voices and softened at kindness, and it made him want to burn down every person who had taught her to shrink. And one night at her door his hand rose to cradle her jaw, his thumb brushing her cheek, and Nessa thought he might finally cross the distance, and instead he only looked at her, memorizing her, and murmured good night because he had made a promise. But Nessa, being Nessa, had also started to notice something else, because in the weeks since she had been given the run of that house, her relentless memory had begun turning up small wrongnesses that would not sit quietly. A delivery van that came on Thursdays had changed its logo 3 months ago, and the driver had changed with it. The East Gate log showed an entry at 2 in the morning, 6 weeks earlier, with no corresponding exit. Then a man she had passed in a corridor in October, a stranger she had catalogued and forgotten, had walked back through those doors last week in a different suit introduced as a new supplier. She did not understand all of it. She understood enough to be frightened, and she did not know that the consigliere had already begun to wonder how much the housekeeper with the perfect memory had quietly filed away. The cruelty came at a formal dinner, and it came wearing diamonds. Dashiell had seated Nessa at his right hand in a gown of deep sapphire that celebrated every curve she had spent her life apologizing for. And midway through the evening, a sleek, beautiful woman named Marguerite, who had spent 2 years positioning herself to be the next Mrs. Cole, cornered her by the sideboard with an audience in tow. "Oh, it's the maid," Marguerite said brightly, loud enough for the room, letting her eyes travel over Nessa's body with theatrical sympathy. In a real dress and everything, she smiled like a blade. "Darling, I say this kindly. Men like Dashiell get sentimental about the help sometimes. It's practically a phase. But nobody looks at a girl who scrubs floors and sees a queen. Do try not to be too heartbroken when he remembers who he is." The temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees, and the old Nessa would have folded, apologized, and slipped out to cry in a bathroom. But something had been rebuilt in her over those weeks, and she lifted her chin and did not shrink. "You're right that I scrub floors here," she said, her quiet voice carrying with perfect calm. "For 2 years, which is how I know that you came to this house in March, in October, and again 3 weeks ago, and that every single time you arrived, you spent a portion of the evening in the East Corridor, which contains nothing but a service door and the safe room." She tilted her head. "Nobody looks at the help, Marguerite, but the help looks at everybody." The silence had teeth. Marguerite went the color of ash and left the room, and Dashiell, who had crossed the floor in silence, took Nessa's hand and pressed his lips to her knuckles in front of the entire table. "You never make yourself small in this house again, Sion Beeg," he murmured, using the endearment for the first time. "Not in my world, and never in front of me." But across that room, a man who had smiled at Dashiell Cole for 16 years understood that his time had just run out. The man was Ambrose, Dashiell's consigliere, and he had a problem shaped exactly like a housekeeper. For 2 years, Ambrose had been quietly selling access to a rival syndicate, and it had been beautiful in its simplicity. Not information, not money, but access. A delivery van with the wrong logo, a gate log with an entry, and no exit. A stranger walked through the front door in a different suit. Ambrose had been building, patiently, a map of the fortress from the inside, and handing it to men who intended to use it. And he had been entirely safe, because the only people who ever saw those small things were the staff, and staff do not look. And if they look, they do not remember. And if they remember, they do not speak. Except one of them saw everything, remembered everything, and had just, in front of 40 people, recited 3 years of a socialite's movements from memory, like a woman reading a receipt. Ambrose smiled, thin and cold, and began, very quietly, to plan. It was the last mistake he would ever make as a free man. Nessa brought it to Dashiell 4 nights later, and she brought it the way she brought everything, which was completely. She had spent those nights going back through 2 years of her own memory, the way other people go back through a filing cabinet, and she had built a list, and the list was appalling. 11 separate irregularities. A van, a gate log, a stranger, a night the west perimeter cameras had been down for maintenance that no one had scheduled, a key that had gone missing in April and reappeared in May, cleaned of the scratch it used to have. And every single one of them, when she laid them beside each other, had one thing in common, which was a man who had signed off on it, approved it, or simply happened to be standing in the hall when it happened. She laid it out on the study table without drama, in order. And Dashiell Cole went very still, and then he did the thing that undid her completely. He believed her instantly. He did not ask her twice. He did not send for a man with a title to confirm what a housekeeper had said. He simply looked at 2 years of evidence assembled entirely inside the head of a woman the world had spent 29 years refusing to look at, and said quietly, "Ambrose." "Yes," said Nessa. Then he took her face in his hands, and for the first time since that night in the hall he closed the distance and pressed his forehead to hers and said, "If I move on him and he sees it coming, he will not come at me. He will come at you." And neither of them knew that Ambrose had made that decision 3 days earlier. The fortress went dark at 2:30. Nessa woke to a silence so complete it pressed against her skin, and every instinct, 29 years of paying attention, had owned, screamed that something was catastrophically wrong. The power was out. The generator stayed dead. Dashiell was gone, drawn to the freight yard at midnight by an emergency she now understood had been a lie. And Nessa, sitting up in the dark, knew with terrible certainty that they had come while he was away, and that they had come for her. She did not scream. She did not faint. She did not run blindly. She thought cold and clear the way she always had. 2 floors below, a silenced weapon coughed and a body met the marble. And then Nessa Kelleher did the one thing that nobody in that house, friend or enemy, had ever thought to account for. She had spent 2 years memorizing that building, not studying it, living inside it until it was written into her hands. She knew the 4th stair from the top spoke, and the 5th did not. She knew the linen passage behind the 2nd floor gallery that had been sealed since the renovation, and that she had personally unsealed to store spare bedding. She knew which of the tall old doors dragged, and which swung, silent. And she knew, because she had catalogued it 11 months ago and never forgotten, that the west corridor had a manual override panel behind a service hatch that could drop every internal security shutter in the house on battery power alone. The men moving through the dark with their goggles had a stolen floor plan. Nessa had the actual house. She was in the west corridor before they reached the landing. She threw the override and heavy steel shutters came down across 3 doorways at once, with a sound like a vault closing, cutting the intruder's team in half and sealing 2 of them into a windowless gallery. She heard them start shouting. Then she went to the study where she knew the safe held a hardwired phone on its own line, and got one message out to the only number that mattered. And then she did not hide in a bedroom or a bathroom or any of the places a frightened woman is expected to go. She went into the sealed linen passage behind the gallery, the one that did not appear on any plan drawn in the last 30 years, and she pulled the panel shut. and she heard Ambrose come down the corridor, unhurried, speaking to the dark as though he could feel her in it. "Come out, Nessa," he said pleasantly. "You clever girl. 2 years I walked past you every day, and it never once occurred to me to wonder what you were doing with all of it." He stopped, listening. "You have that list, don't you?" "I have wondered for a week exactly how much a housekeeper's memory is worth, and it turns out the answer is my entire life. So you understand my position, nothing personal. You simply remember too much." He was 3 feet from the panel, and Nessa, crouched in the dark with her whole body shaking, did the one thing he never expected. She spoke. "You should have checked the study safe before you came for me, Ambrose," she said. Silence. "Because everything I put together left this house 6 days ago," she continued, her voice steadier than she felt. "Written out, dated, witnessed, sitting with 3 people who will hand it to Dashiell and every family on this coast the moment I stop confirming I am alive. Kill me tonight, and you do not just lose your arrangement. You expose yourself to the whole commission as the man who sold his own house from the inside." Ambrose's certainty flickered. He had not planned for the housekeeper to be armed with anything but a duster. And in his half-second of hesitation, the front gates below exploded inward with the tortured shriek of an engine pushed past its limits. Dashiell had come home. Time seemed to fracture. Gunfire erupted below, brief and brutal and absolute, and Ambrose spun toward the sound, and Nessa, seizing the only moment she would ever get, shoved the panel open with her full weight into the back of his knees. He went down hard against the gallery wall, his weapon skittering across the boards into the dark, and she was already moving, kicking it away beneath a cabinet. And then the doors were thrown open, and Dashiell filled the frame, soaked in rain, his eyes wild and searching. Ronan, his loyal lieutenant, poured in behind him with 4 armed men, and the trap Ambrose had spent 2 years building snapped shut around him instead. Dashiell had him by the throat against the wall before he could speak. 16 years, he said. "You walked my halls for 16 years, and then you came into my house for her." Then he turned his head, and the murderous cold in his eyes dissolved into raw, naked fear, and he released Ambrose to Ronan's men and crossed the room in 2 strides. His hands moved frantically over Nessa's arms, her face, her shoulders, checking for blood, for wounds, for any harm to what was his. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his voice cracking. "Did he touch you? Look at me. Breathe. Tell me." "I'm all right." Nessa wept, her fingers twisting in his soaked coat. "I dropped the shutters on half of them, and I hit the rest with a linen cupboard." Dashiell let out a broken, disbelieving laugh into her hair, and then he framed her tear-streaked face in his trembling hands and looked at her the way no one in her whole overlooked life had ever looked at her. "You are magnificent," he breathed. 16 years he stood beside me, and my men never saw it, and you caught him from a delivery van and a gate log." And then his voice cracked open entirely. "Do you know what I have been doing for 2 years?" he said hoarsely. "Being careful. Telling myself that if I never said it out loud, it could never be taken from me. And then a man from your building asked you to dinner, and I nearly came apart in my own kitchen." He pressed his forehead to hers. "I am finished being careful, Sian Big." Ambrose, the man who had smiled at Dashiell Cole for 16 years while selling him the inside of his own house, learned the price of underestimating them before the week was out. Dashiell did not act in blind rage. He let Nessa lay the whole of it before the commission, the way she had laid it on the study table, in order, without drama. 11 irregularities across 2 years, every one of them witnessed and remembered by a woman nobody in that world had ever thought to look at twice. And when the 5 families had seen it, Nessa did not counsel death. "You do not need to make him a martyr," she said quietly. "You need to make him nothing." So they did it her way. They stripped Ambrose of every asset and exposed his treason to the very families he had schemed to serve, and let them cast him out, left alive, bankrupt, disgraced, unable to walk into a single room on the coast without every man in it knowing precisely what he had done, a fate the old men agreed was far crueler than any quick and merciful bullet. And Marguerite, who had said that nobody looks at a girl who scrubs floors and sees a queen, found her own 3 visits to that east corridor entered into the record of the investigation, and spent a very uncomfortable season answering questions, and then spent the years after it watching from the far end of every table Nessa now sat at the head of. Months later, on a bright morning washed gold with new sun, Nessa Kelleher stood on the terrace of the fortress she now ran outright, and she did not step aside for anyone anymore. She wore rich colors tailored to celebrate every curve she had spent 29 years apologizing for. She had stopped saying sorry when other people were in her way. Dashiell came out and stopped, simply to watch her, the way he had been watching her for 2 silent years. "You're staring, Mr. Cole," she said, a smile in her voice. "I will never stop," he said, crossing to her and taking her hands. "Do you know what I understood? That Tuesday in the kitchen?" he asked quietly. "I had spent 2 years telling myself I felt nothing, and it took 4 words from you and a man from your building to bring the whole thing down." He tilted her chin up, his dark eyes soft, in a way the rest of the world would never see. "Everyone in this house looked straight through you for 2 years, Sean Beeg, and the only reason I am alive is that you were looking at all of us the entire time." He kissed her knuckles. "You were never invisible. You were simply the only person in the building worth seeing, and I was too much of a coward to say so until somebody else asked you to dinner first." Nessa looked up at the man the whole city feared. A man who bowed to no one and yet bowed entirely to her, and for the first time in her life, she believed she was exactly enough. She had spent 29 years making herself smaller, stepping aside, apologizing for the space she took up, certain that a woman like her was something men settled for in private and never chose out loud. And she had proven every last one of them wrong, because the memory the whole world had dismissed as a housekeeper's fussing had saved an empire and a life. She had told him she had a date, and 4 words had undone 2 years of a dangerous man's silence. And she had learned at last that she had never once been invisible. She had only been the one thing he was too afraid to admit he could not live without. If Nessa and Dashiell's story of quiet devotion, hidden worth, and hard-won vindication moved you, if you felt that jolt when the housekeeper said she had a date and the whole room went cold, then do us a small favor before you go. Smash that like button right now. Share this story with someone who needs to hear that the person nobody looks at is so often the one who sees everything. Subscribe to the channel and ring the bell so you never miss another twist-filled tale of the overlooked soul who finally gets everything she deserves. And drop a comment below and tell us, what was your favorite moment in Nessa and Dashiell's story?